Welcome to the Upshot, podcast on the latest disc golf news. I'm Josh Mansfield, the co-host, and this week I am without Charlie. Charlie's on vacation for the first half of this week, probably enjoying the 49ers' recent victory. For all you football fans, don't worry, I promise we're going to continue to talk about playoff football. In the meantime, though, I am joined by special guest host Andrew Fish. Andrew is a longtime sponsored professional with Discraft in his 6th year with Discraft. He is a former collegiate and club ultimate player, the assistant tournament director of the Women's Open of Maryland, number 5, and the owner of the best disc golf in Twitter and disc golf, Andrew, thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks, Josh. Good to be here. You're laying out some bold claims there, but we'll see what I can come up with.
Well, we're going to be talking about your Twitter a little bit later, though, so I'm excited to talk about some of those. In the meantime, this show is going to resemble a pretty standard show. We're going to go through some of the news and react. After which we'll get to interview and talk to you, Andrew, a little bit about your experience in disc golf. So, first up on the news, the Shelly Sharpe Memorial recently happened. This has replaced the Memorial Championship that used to be on the Pro Tour. It now is an A tier, is no longer a part of the Pro Tour, but you still have some notable names coming and participating. Most recently in this event, Anthony Barella takes down the win, beating Cale LaVisca by a stroke, and then also beating out Drew Gibson, who took 3rd, and farther down the leaderboard, Adam Hammis. Anthony Barella averaged 10.52 golf, well above his rating, and pretty handily beats this tournament. Andrew, do you think that tournaments like this are anything to read into, even if they're not on the Pro Tour Silver Series, if they are well attended by pros?
I think they can be, but we should treat it a little bit like spring training in baseball. You can see who's got a good swing right now. You can see who's really leveled up from the previous year, but don't go proclaiming the winners future world champs or something. And real quick, the Memorial still is an event. It'll be between Las Vegas and Waco, I believe.
Okay, so this is a separate event from the Memorial then?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But it is held at the Vista course that is featured on the Memorial Championship. So
right, correct.
It is something, though, that down in Arizona that is a little bit of a preview then of what's to come. I think also what's a really good point here is that when you look at the course, Eagle and Simon shoot record rounds at the Memorial back in 2019. Anthony Barella, known for his arm, not shocking that he plays well at the Vista course as well. So I think it's a great analogy, though, when you look at the spring training for baseball. When you look over the FPO side, not quite as well attended, but you do have Jennifer Allen winning by 9 over Callie McMorran, and then Owen Scoggins coming in 3rd. Not quite as well attended, like I said, but you did get to see a couple of names. So disc golf's coming back around.
Yeah, it's great to see. And I think especially for the folks who are wintering in Arizona or the Southwest, like this is their chance to get back out there and see where their games are. For Jennifer Allen, these are pretty local to where she's living now. And I think it's great to see Callie McMorran back on. It seemed like she diverted from the tour in the middle of last year. I don't know exactly what her situation is, but it really seems like this could be a good start to her season.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's a good course to reflect. I mean, Jennifer Allen winning is no shock. Former world distance holder. She might still hold the title officially. Throws a mile. And so, again, with Anthony Barella, not surprising. But, Callie McMorran also playing well is definitely something exciting to see and a positive trend. I think what's also important, as you mentioned, I think this A tier coming before anything on the Pro Tour does give us a good reflection as to where people may be feeling coming into after their off-season training. So,
yeah, no doubt.
Next up in the news, we have a couple of signings with Team MVP and some contract extensions. MVP had a relatively quiet off-season in what was considered quite an exciting one. But there are a few that I think are pretty interesting. Most notably, MVP signs Madison Walker to the 2022 season. Madison, who was formerly sponsored by Innova, went without a primary manufacturer sponsor in 2021. Still sponsored by Upper Park Bags, however. Your sponsor as well, correct, Andrew?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, so still had some sponsorship, but no major disc manufacturer. However, she was still 15th on the Pro Tour and had a 9th place finish at the Portland Open. So that's an exciting signing for them. Raven Newsom was promoted to the Premier team and signed to a 2-year contract extension. Raven really made a splash when he was on lead card coverage and his 4th place finish at the Des Moines Challenge shortly after Worlds. And then the final signing is Stacey Haas, the runner-up at Junior Worlds, who, according to their post, indicates will be touring at least partially this season. So that's another exciting signing. Andrew, when you look at these 3 signings for MVP, which one do you think holds the most excitement or potential for team MVP?
I think the immediate buzz is going to be about Madison because she's so well regarded among pros, among fans, among media, basically everybody who meets her. That's a really good person to have on your team. She's probably not going to win that many tour events, but she certainly is consistent and steady and will be up on, second, third card pretty regularly. It's good that Raven gets promoted. He's definitely put in the work and he is clearly among the top players on their team. The Stacey Haas signing is going to be one of the best signings of this offseason. I say that without hesitation. Her rating's up by 50 points since this time last year. Like you said, great finish at, was it Am Worlds, right?
Junior Worlds.
Junior Worlds. So young player, just won her last 5 events of the year, including 2 A-tiers in Michigan. This is pretty clearly a good get for MVP.
So when you look at players of this age, it's oftentimes, so this is something I want to speak to a little bit. In esports, there's real contention about the age that you can sign players due to, if they're under 18, how long can you lock them to a contract? Is it fair, especially with the way contracts are going and buyout clauses, if you sign somebody when they're 15 and then, in 1 year they end up being like Gandon Burr, for example, and you're paying just their entry fees? How do you think disc golf needs to handle signing and recruiting young players to tour? Especially because a lot of other professional sports in America rely on collegiate recruits. And so you've already reached an established age, typically in the 20s of when they get to play. How should disc golf navigate signing players like Stacey Haas, who are still very young?
Yeah, I think disc golf is a little unique in that it's an individual sport that is played at any level. Like, you don't have to be amazing to play. So there's a wide range of players who are, 15 to 18.
Sure.
For the players who are on the top end of that and are rapidly improving, I think it makes a lot of sense for them to sign short-term deals or deals that have a lot of performance bonuses. It's not something that we can really regulate because, the PDGA doesn't get involved in sponsorships. Mm-hmm. There isn't a players union to speak of, although there is a PDGA Pro Touring Players Committee, and there will be I don't recall the exact terminology, but a Pro Tour panel of players who are giving recommendations and advice. For them, it might make sense to act in some way as a lobbying group for players to, share contract information or give suggestions of, this is what it was like when I was coming up. You should expect, these kinds of things, or ask for your entry fees, ask for disc bonuses. But if I were those young players, I would be seeking short-term deals or deals that I can escalate over, 2 or 3.
I think that's incredible advice. I think what's important about recognizing the panel or the subcommittee perhaps looking in their interests of lobbying on behalf of players is that when you're a top player, Missy Gannon, for example, going back into her re-signing with Discraft, it's very clear that she could very much benefit from an agent. She could benefit from third-party assistance when it comes to contract negotiation, and that's becoming widely accepted in the disc golf community. I think one of the struggles is that when you're this young, it can be difficult to know your worth. And so, it's hard to justify saying I'm going to spend money on an agent or on some sort of representation when you don't even know how much you may be getting from it, or if you really can cut it on tour. I mean, these are still young players that, Stacey Haas seems to have a ton of potential and very exciting. But as disc golf continues to grow in popularity, I think we're going to see more and more players that are exciting and have potential who don't make it at the top and the highest levels of disc golf. And so having the ability then to find people who can offer some sort of assistance or lobbying on behalf of those players, I think is really valuable.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the converse to that is we need people who are also going to be brutally honest to players, who can evaluate them and say, you don't have what it takes to play on tour right now. So you shouldn't drop everything and, spend $5,000 on Pro Tour entries. We're getting to a point where in order to do that, you have to make some significant life sacrifices and have a lot of, background privilege where there's always a safe place for you to go. Mm-hmm. If you get hurt or you just can't hack it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really valuable point. And I think that the tour card, which we're going to talk a little bit more about later, is begun to kind of establish you've met the threshold for how good you need to be in order to at least have a bare minimum standard of being on tour. Kind of creates that line. And then how earning that tour card kind of gives you the idea as to whether or not you're going to be able to cut it. And that's kind of the development. But we'll come back to that.
Sure.
Next piece of news. The second Disc Golf Pro Tour All-Star event has been announced that will be held in Arizona again on February 11th through the 13th. And it's being held at the El Conquistador Resort, which hosted the 2021 Arizona State Disc Golf Championship. This is going to be a temporary course similar to the Match Play Championship that was also held at a country club and put in a temporary course for that purpose. And this year, 12 players in both MPO and FPO are going to be invited. This is up from 8 of last year. The top 8-point earners from last season were invited. And then the last 4 are going to be invited based on a combination of equally weighted factors, which include the 2021 Disc Golf Pro Tour points, 2021 Disc Golf Pro Tour Championship finish, a fan vote, and a media vote, both of which have already been completed. We're still waiting full details on format, but they did announce that the format will differ from last year, which featured a doubles round followed by a singles round, after which Paul Macbeth and Kona Panis were crowned champion. I think it's really valuable to see events like the All-Star event and the Match Play Championship for the Pro Tour. If we're being frank, the Pro Tour is in the entertainment industry. That's what they are out to do. That's how they're trying to make money. And so events like this are things that I think oftentimes fans are really drawn to. But I also think it can play an important role in attracting new and maybe casual players who aren't ready to sit down and commit to 5 rounds of a world championship, but could understand the excitement of the All-Star event. In the pro side, though, Andrew, what do you think? Is there value for the pros besides just financial? Are these events things that are good and important fixtures on tour for pro players?
If you make it, I think you absolutely go, because it's basically free notoriety and it's geographically sensible to where you're going to be at for LVC anyway. But I doubt that it's at this point for the Pro Tour. I think it's exploratory. It's them trying to figure out what format is compelling enough to get people to tune into something that's basically a startup. It seemed like the interest in match play was a little bit muted last year, but now that this is the second iteration of the All-Star event, perhaps it generates more interest.
And it seems like when we talk about different formats that they're trying to use to attract viewership, it feels to me that these differing formats are probably going to be the most compatible with ESPN coverage and trying to reach to outside media. I think it's the most marketable. I think it's the most marketable to sponsorships. Would you agree with that? Or do you think that we should still be trying to package traditional disc golf tournaments for outside and third-party media consumption?
I mean, I'm a grumpy 64-year-old man, so I'm content with just the standard formats for everything. But let's look at the Pro Tour Championship, for example. It's kind of a difficult format to understand if it's explained to you the first time. Mm-hmm. But by the time you're down to 4 players in MPO and 4 players in FPO, that every shot is going to be covered and that there are going to be some significant stakes on a majority of them. So for the simplicity of we know that the winner is going to come off this card, I think there's value in that. In being able to pitch it to, ESPN or another network.
Well, and, in addition to that, it was pretty clear based on the sponsorship names, LL Bean, for example, that getting those titles, I think, are easier to associate when you have championship and all-stars next to their name. It's the entire packaging.
Like branding is the idea that something is whatever we say it is. And if we say this is the All-Star weekend, then, that lends credibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if like most people probably aren't going to pay serious attention to it, and way to go, winner. But we don't treat that the same way we will the champion of LVC.
Sure. Well, and I think that this is something Charlie and I have talked about, and I'd love to get your opinion on this. I have felt that way a lot about the Disc Golf Pro Tour Championship in the past, because it feels, with the weird format, that sometimes the winner, I mean, Nathan Queen, for example, I think is a perfect example of a very much an underdog, an upset. He came from the first round. We have a lot of players who have come from the first round in order to win that tournament. But recently, as the cash continues to go up and the prize for the top competitor and first place continues to increase, it's commanding more attention. Do you think that, in terms of importance, the Disc Golf Pro Tour Championship, does cash make a major? Does cash make, enough notoriety of a tournament that even if it isn't technically a major, it's still one that pros are like, this matters more to me than other events?
It shouldn't, but it does. Like, that is our current reality. And it may be that for some of the top players who make most of their money off of, tour series sales or other endorsements, even a $30,000 payday isn't that big a deal. But for Nathan Queen, that made his season.
Sure.
It's a huge deal for him to get paid out like that. I think the disadvantage to something like the Pro Tour Championship is that over 18 holes, you're inviting kind of a lot of randomness. The compelling part of that event is the chaos that can happen with, someone sprinting through 4 rounds each time with their back against the wall. Whereas, at Worlds, you want lots of holes. You want to know that whoever won did it on the strength of their entire tournament performance, not because they got lucky for a round here or there, which is what could happen after a bye. I'm not sure I articulated that super well, but ultimately, I think we want more rounds in a standard format to be what governs the best titles, not necessarily a huge cash infusion.
So let me ask you this, because when you look at the Pro Tour Championship, Missy Gannon, for example, gets a Pro Tour Championship signature disc. Kevin Jones got a signature disc after he won. It's something that right now does command some attention. And I think it's in part because, as you said, while that money shouldn't matter, it does right now. So let's imagine a world where disc golf sponsorships are so lucrative that, everyone has professional salaries, right? Look at professional golf, professional tennis. And I know we're years down the road from that, but imagining that all of our top players have incredibly lucrative sponsorship deals, so that even if the Pro Tour has $250,000 prizes, that's seen as, nothing compared to what players are making. In that world, does the Pro Tour Championship matter to manufacturers? And if not, then do pros even really consider it that important? And does the Pro Tour have to change up what that championship looks like in order to draw the appeal?
I think they might. They might have to change it up. For the first few years that it's run, I think that the idea of inviting the top 16 or 32 players was primarily to incentivize player and guaranteeing that they would get paid out just for showing up. I think a lot of that was to incentivize players to build their schedule around the Disc Golf Pro Tour. Mm-hmm. Now we're at the point where the Pro Tour card is a thing, and players are going to do that because that's the only game in town. There isn't a national tour anymore. Most regions don't have like a coherent series of A tiers that you could just hit up. So it might be that the Pro Tour already has the captive audience of pros, and they don't need to pour that many resources into it, as long as they still have a reasonable baseline for added cash.
It's fascinating because, when you look at the FedEx Cup, we're talking $5 million or $15 million. And so I guess that's the point, is that the Pro Tour, if they want it to stay relevant, because they don't no longer need to capture the attention, if they want the championship to stay relevant, they're going to have to continue to increase their prize proportional to what sponsorships are of that day to make it worth it for the pros to engage. I think at the end of the day, though, it does offer, as you said, the chaos offers amazing entertainment value. And so you'll definitely get fans from it at the very least.
Yeah. And, by this point, I think we can fairly say that the Pro Tour has a plan. And we may not be privy to that, but they might decide that rather than putting $100,000 into the Pro Tour championship purse, they're better off putting that into Disc Golf Network, or hiring more employees full time, or, distributing it among some of their tour events. Like, who knows what direction they're going to go. But it seems like they're putting a lot of value on the Pro Tour Championship being the last big stop of the season after USCGC. So
it's
whatever they're doing,
yeah,
they'll figure it out.
It's interesting to see how money does change that conversation. The final piece of news that I want to get to is one that is very timely, I think. The PDGA has announced that they are looking for volunteers for medical subcommittees. These two subcommittees are for gender-based divisions, and this kind of goes back to the question of trans women in FPO, and that's a recent discussion that Charlie and I tackled in last week's show, and then prohibitive substances. Both of these subcommittees are done out of the regard that with PDGA partnering with WIFDIF and working to become a part of international sports again, we have to be in compliance with certain international rules. And Andrew, coming from an ultimate background, you may be able to speak to this even better than I can. I know Charlie's definitely the expert on international flying disc events and rules. But what the PDGA announcement says is that they're doing this under the IOC's recommendations and framework of how international sports need to address within their own sports gender-based divisions, and then ensuring that our prohibitive substances guidelines are in line with international sports. So, Andrew, what are your thoughts or some analysis that you've got on the recent news on these subcommittees?
I think it's great that they're doing both of these. There have been calls, whether open or closed, to the PDGA to address both of these issues, whether it's using performance enhancing drugs or the ability of transgender or non-binary individuals to participate in protected divisions. I particularly liked that the PDGA's announcement, or their solicitation for members of this subcommittee, identified that they want people coming from a medical and scientific field for both of these. Mm-hmm. They're not simply making a democratic poll about this. They are trying to work through and figure out what is the appropriate way that we can get meaningful competition for all of our athletes. And I'm speaking for both of those subcommittees.
As you mentioned, Andrew, if you look at the announcement and the press release, the PDGA is requiring you to submit a CV and that your credentials are going to be verified before you're allowed to participate on the subcommittee. So they're doing a thorough job to ensure that you do come, as you said, from this medical and scientific background. I also appreciate the subcommittee and the nature of the approach, because as you mentioned, not only is it not necessarily democratic that we just poll active PDGA members and then take their opinions of how we want to approach this, but I think that the subcommittee also provides the PDGA a buffer from the voice of the public opinion. Because even in democratic systems in which you were to ask state coordinators, for example, or there are lots of ways that you could approach trying to gain meaningful input from the body of the PDGA. But at the end of the day, any sort of democratic system are most likely going to hear the voices that are the loudest. Those that are on social media, that are posting the most, that are making it the loudest and making sure their point is heard. And so it can be hard to take an accurate reflection of people's feelings on the matter and approaching it with inclusivity and fairness. And so I think that taking this medical approach and scientific approach, both is in accordance with international standards and other international organizations, but it's also just the best and fairest way to go about doing so.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Well, that's most of the news for the week. After what was a crazy off season, this feels like a slow news week, but some important and exciting things coming up. We're going to take a quick break. After the break, we're going to talk to Andrew a little bit about his background and get some analysis on some issues that he's posted about on his Twitter. Stay with us. You're listening to The Upshot.
The Upshot is presented by Pound Disc Golf, makers of the best bags in the sport. From 3D modeling to technical materials, Pound utilizes current technology to push product development beyond the current boundaries. Plus, they test multiple prototypes in the lab and in the field, and they build all their packs in the USA. Don't settle for a copycat. Get a Pound bag at pounddiscgolf.com.
Welcome back. We're now going to talk, Andrew, a little bit about your background and get to know you a little bit better as a pro. So, and one thing, I mean, I followed your Twitter for several years since getting into disc golf, and most recently, you tweeted during the Ultimate Club Nationals. You gave out an open call to tell about regions that you particularly like or dislike, how much you care about winning, and a couple different things. And I put in my request for an ultimate team to follow. I don't remember which teams they were, but I will tell you, I watched matches from at least one match from each of the teams you recommended, and was very impressed. It was my first time ever watching what would be considered, professional ultimate frisbee, and it was exciting. So that was something really exciting. And so your background is in ultimate frisbee, correct?
Yeah, correct. I've been playing ultimate for almost 15 years, and I guess this is only my 10th in disc golf. I started playing in an Orlando Summer League before I started college, and then I went to Georgia Tech, played 5 years there, went to nationals my final year, and I really like disc golf. I like ultimate far more.
Really?
Yeah. I like having teammates. I like all the different ways that you can impact the game. I like that it has such a different native pace than disc golf does. As much as I want to play disc golf, I would give it up if there was an equivalent like pro scene in ultimate.
So, all right. So you said you've played ultimate for 18 years. Is that correct?
15 or so. Yeah.
15. Okay. So 15 years. And so 10 years later, and then 10 years in disc golf. So that means what? Sounds like after college you got into disc golf?
Yeah. So in college ultimate, administrated by USA Ultimate, formerly the Ultimate Players Association. Also, I should say my UPA number from 2007 is 174,000 something. We didn't hit that until very recently in disc golf. It's wild how disc golf media and disc golf payouts are huge, but there are so many more members of USAU. I meditate on that often.
Where's USAU at right now in numbers? Do you know?
Oh, I have no idea.
Okay.
Probably approaching 1 million because
Wow.
There's several hundred college teams, and then each of those has 25 or more players. And they're reloading every year. I haven't been immersed in Ultimate nearly enough lately to keep track of their membership stats or anything like that. So you get 5 years of college eligibility.
Okay.
And when I was in grad school and done with Ultimate, I was very hurt. I had torn my peroneal tendon in 2011, kind of muddled through the 2012 season, but I was just not effective as a player. But I still like throwing. And I met the Georgia Tech Disc Golf Club in our rec center, and they said they were going to be playing at Perkerson Park in Atlanta that Saturday. So I went out, joined them, and less than a month later, I was playing the Southeast Collegiate Open at the IDGC.
I remember when it was announced that Champions Cup would be at IDGC, Nate Sexton says he hates it because the course is too hard. And so a month in, you were playing at IDGC?
Yeah, I mean, they had tailored the layout a little bit to us. We weren't playing 3 rounds on Jackson. I think we played doubles on Jackson.
Oh, okay. Okay, got it.
So at some point, I'd like to have a discussion about spinny woods versus power woods. And I think that Jackson is mostly a spinny woods course, and that's not how Sexton plays.
Okay.
Sexton's very, very good at playing placement shots with overstable discs, but Jackson is like at 250, you need to have gotten your hyzer flip moving flat, and then it can finish a little bit. It's like, I think that's why Paul plays so well there and Ricky plays so well there.
Are you excited?
Guys like,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's always been unfortunate to me that it was a every other year and then a yearly, and now we haven't had an NT or a major or anything like that at the IGC since 2018. Is that right?
I'd have to double check, but it sounds right. It's been several years.
Yeah. So I'm very excited for it.
Okay.
At that time, when I had been playing for only a month, I was leaning on a Beat DX Shark and a Blizzard crate. I had a third hand putter, and everything was at this angle. It was it was very much adapted from what I knew from Ultimate, and sure. It took me several years to learn how to throw an overstable disc properly, because I was just so dialed in to throwing that hyzer release angle, and I was smart enough and good enough that whatever the wind was doing, I could throw right through it with a hyzer flip. But there's a limit to that skill, and I found it. I had to push through it. I had to find some different tools.
So you say then you like Ultimate significantly better than disc golf. You start playing disc golf, you play it well. What prompts you then to move towards professional disc golf instead of sticking with Club Ultimate, for example?
It wasn't until 2015 that my ankle really healed up. And in that time, I got to darn near 10, 15 or so. Still didn't really know what I was doing, just fearlessly throwing hyzers through the woods. And I think I cashed at my second ever pro event. So it was kind of a very quick rise to being good enough that I could at least play locally and be pretty good. And then I moved to Maryland, and that was an entirely different set of courses to learn to attack. And that made me grow. And then I played Maple Hill. I played the Pittsburgh Worlds. I played a bunch of places that, basically taught me, you need to get better at this. But I was still missing the team aspect of Ultimate. It's hard to motivate yourself to go out and just putt when it's miserable outside. But it was a lot of fun to play Ultimate League or to join up with a team and, always have 25 people who've got your back. Have a shared experience of winning. And, a lot of times it's not so much about winning and losing as it is enjoying the experience with your friends, with your teammates. The last Club Ultimate season I played was in 2017. And really, I got too good at disc golf to keep playing Ultimate. The seasons are more or less concurrent, from midsummer through late fall. And that's exactly when the pro tour, the national tour is getting towards the East Coast. Mm-hmm. So I kind of had to pick at some point. I tried to play both seasons concurrently, and I would just be a tired, broken, angry man by the end of the year. So ultimately, I'm not sad with how it's all shaken out. I love playing professional disc golf. But there's still a very deep place in my heart for Ultimate.
So would you say that you are a better disc golfer than you are Ultimate player?
Oh, unquestionably.
Unquestionably. Okay. And so when you, and if I'm not mistaken, you also work full time, correct?
Yeah, I'm a professional engineer. I review stormwater management plans for Baltimore County, Maryland.
Okay. So, Andrew, if you have your professional career, I can assume then that disc golf is not your primary source of income. And given that that's the case, why would you pick to go into professional disc golf rather than sticking with, club ultimate or the, professional ultimate scene, whatever that may constitute exactly, and just do the sport that you say that you love more?
Yeah. So professional ultimate, which I've never tried out for, most of those players are playing for like a travel stipend and a jersey. There really isn't that much money associated with it. But I don't want to be so cynical as to say that like this is entirely a money thing. When it became apparent that, I finished 23rd at the first Worlds I ever went to in Pittsburgh. 2017 and 18, I was top 20. When I was doing that, it was a real light bulb moment of like, you're never going to be top 20 in the world in ultimate, like clearly. So it was a pretty easy choice to say like my main hobby when I'm not at work is going to be playing disc golf. The other part of that is that the thing I love about ultimate is, well, I love the gameplay, but like I love having teammates. It's also really hard to get 25 people who are, who are bought in the same amount as you, who have the same goals and objectives, who live in the same geographic area, and that you can stand at all. It's kind of not a reality for very long. That's why like each team is so special. With disc golf, whenever I want to play, I can go play. I can work out, I can run, I can do the thing to get better for myself. So, I like ultimate more, but I feel like there's a ceiling in disc golf that A, I haven't reached yet, but B, it would be foolish to throw away like my one real opportunity to be elite at something.
So with your profession, I'm sure there's a couple reasons, and I think I listened to your interview with Brian Earhart on the Flight Diary a little while ago, and you have my favorite phrase that I've ever heard in disc golf in my entire life, and that is artless hyzers. I laughed so hard when I heard you use that phrase. And you use it to describe courses that you say aren't particularly interesting to you. So tell me about how you structure your tour season, given the limited time that you do have with your profession in order to be a touring professional. Sure.
For the most part, I build my season around what I can drive to in a weekend without taking any extra time off work. In the last couple of years, I've been able to add in Worlds or another major. I haven't played USDGC since 2015, since that requires a full week. There's a lot of regional A tiers or even pro tour events that I've been able to get to that I can do with 1 or 2 days off work. Last year, I got 0 practice days at MVP and Green Mountain Championship, and I was back at work at 7:30 on Monday morning. Same thing with D-Glow. I was in my car 15 minutes after my round finished on Sunday, and I was back at work bright and early Monday. So it's this tricky balance between where do I think I can play reasonably well, and what can I do? How can I maximize the number of good size events I get to each year?
So this leads me then to kind of away from a little bit more, talking about you, and I want to talk about some of your opinions and analysis on different issues in the disc golf community. The first of which being the tour card. Mm-hmm. The Disc Golf Pro Tour recently announced the tour card for top 75 MPO and the top 25 FPO players in the Pro Tour standings were given a card, and then various exemptions. In our Discord, or subscriber Discord, there were questions about what we call regional professionals like yourself that play based on that geographic region because you work full-time. James Proctor, I think, being another good example of that, just on the West Coast. And there were questions about whether or not you were going to purchase a full tour card. tell me a little bit about your decision-making calculus in doing so, because you did end up purchasing a tour card, correct?
Yep.
So tell me a little about that decision-making calculus.
So I think if everything goes perfectly this year, I'll make it to about 7 of the Pro Tour events and 2 majors. That's my hope right now. It's been pretty clear to me for the last couple years that the Pro Tour was going to be tightening up their standards, and they were going to reward the players who were most committed to their model. Same thing that we were kind of talking about with the Tour Championship earlier. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to be squeezed out. Like, even if I have my job, I know that I'm capable of competing on any given weekend with the top players in the world. So I it ended up being pretty expensive per tournament, but I chose to go in for the tour card, even though I'm not going to utilize all the benefits at all the stops, because I want to have a background. If next year I have to apply for an exemption, I want to be able to say, look, I put in the effort this year to get to as many as I could get to. Because although we didn't really know the mechanics and the benefits in 2021, it's now pretty clear that they're going to be allocating the vast majority of spots to tour card holders in future. And with more players able to stay on the road, that's who's going to comprise the biggest part of the event. And I don't want to get stuck, having to play in a qualifier, just to play Delaware or something.
I think you bring up a really important point that as more and more players are able to stay on the road full time, it's obvious why the Pro Tour wants to prioritize those players. The storylines of, improving players over the season, of the ups and downs. I mean, those are the players that in the entertainment industry, I'm sure, offer a lot of value. What would you hope to see from the Pro Tour then moving forward? Would it just simply be continuing with the exemption program, or would you like to see another system of incorporating regional pros into the tour who obviously, you and James Proctor both can compete at the highest level. I don't think there's any question in anybody's mind about that. So how would you like to see the tour adapt, to your circumstances, and give me a compelling reason why that's important?
Yeah. It's not just guys like me and James we're not household names, but we are established pros. Mm-hmm. We've played many of the big tour stops, but we talked earlier about young players. If they're not able to just say, hey, I'm going on the road, there needs to be a valid way for them to get to that point. Otherwise, they're never going to break in. It's going to be the same players year after year who just happen to be there in 2021 and receive that benefit of being in the tour card program initially. I have little doubt that there is a plan, and it seems like Silver Series is starting to become that, where I've heard speculated that above a certain threshold, you might not be able to make it into Silver Series. If there gets to be a regional circuit, and I'm not just saying the Silver Series underlays the tour and follows it around. I'm saying it would make more sense if there was an East Coast or a Central and then a West Coast Silver Series where the top X finishers from each one get the opportunity to purchase a tour card for the next year. If we're being callous and real about it, the Pro Tour doesn't really care about numbers 60 through 75 on the MPO side. Those aren't their money makers. Those aren't the ones that people tune in to see. They care about 1 to 20, maybe. So it's not really going to hurt the Pro Tour that much if there is turnover in the bottom, if that gives an opportunity for other players to filter up.
Do you think the tour card is an advancement? Do you think it was timed appropriately, or do you think it was a little premature based on where the state of the sport is?
I think if it wasn't time, it's no more than a year in advance. And I think that they are giving reasonable opportunity for exemptions or, tournament specific registration. There are other ways to get in. The thing I dislike about it is that tour, the points are kind of arbitrary. Who says that, I don't know exactly the structure, but I played 4 tour events last year and I finished in the top 75. Do I have a more or less legitimate claim than someone who, grinded it out and finished 79th. That's kind of neither here nor there. But I think we are getting to the point where simple ratings-based registration doesn't cut it. And the Pro Tour is starting to look at players as, not just their product, but an investment. Mm-hmm. And that's what they're doing with this tour card. There's various benefits in there that are all about player wellness, or giving them better access to things like media, or, I don't recall all the benefits, but you can look those up. They're publicly on the Pro Tour website, because it's clear that they are looking at players as a core element of their business model, not just someone that they're benefiting off of. So I think in the sense that a tour card formalizes that, it's a good idea for it. And the Pro Tour has always pushed the envelope for lots of things. Like spectator passes weren't a thing more than a few years ago. Live disc golf that covered more than one card, barely a thing until, 2020 maybe. So by and large, I trust what their model looks like, because they have a pretty good proven track record of guessing right at the right times.
When you talk about the benefits, some of those benefits include access to a warm-up area, access to equipment for that warm-up. You have athletic trainer or a personal trainer in Seth Munsey. Mm-hmm. You also have access to teledoc and other health benefits. You then have food and other rest areas. You have access to media, like you talked about. So of all those benefits, which ones do you feel are the most, progressive, you could say, or the most beneficial, and the change that you felt like was most needed for the 2022 season?
I think the biggest thing that I saw that was, oh, wow, I never thought about it like that, is they're going to have like a specific autograph area, and players are going to be able to opt in to go there rather than basically defaulting to walking through a crowd of people when they finish their round. Crowd control is a big deal at a lot of these events, and we've kind of built that in to courses that already exist. And like some of the courses just simply aren't set up to handle that. That's why Maple Hill has had to have like a very restrictive VIP pass to get into the woods. So I think that giving the players spaces where they can warm up or stretch out or rest and recover, and then opt in to signing autographs, I think that's a huge deal for like the players to be who they are and not have to feel obligated all the time to be like on their best behavior or like having to perform for fans.
It feels like, and very early in my time on the show this spring, we talked about players unionizing and creating a players union. It feels like with the tour card, this is one of the natural steps in the progression towards a more formal players union, given that we just now have, it's clearly and easy to define who that membership would be. Do you feel like that's part of the natural progression as well? And what do you think are the steps to get there? Do you think that's something that needs to happen? I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions right there. So tackle them as you wish.
I think I've always been a little bit averse to the idea of a players union being the same as like, the metal workers or the Teamsters or something, mm-hmm. because we're all doing this like more or less voluntarily. We're 1099 sponsored players, not formal employees. And maybe there's a couple guys who differ in that. And the same is true with the Pro Tour. Like we are there by choice. They are providing us a service and we are providing them a product to market. So I think the idea with a tour card and then like a panel of 6 players who are representing that group of players, it resembles a union, but it's more like a lobbying group that can participate in the Pro Tour structure and help guide them in decisions that benefit the tour as well as benefit the players. Like, I don't know that we have a whole lot of leverage to say, we demand more money. We demand, paid time off, vacation days. Like that's not a reality. Like this is more like a gig economy where you choose what parts of the tour you want to go to. And, you get access to the payout structure if you do that. Having the tour card and having that lobbying group is going to improve the Pro Tours product. It's also going to improve the player's experience. That's the way I see it, because it's going to be a direct conduit from the players up to the Pro Tour rather than, all of us feeling like no one's driving the bus and our only recourse is to go to social media.
Wait, you mean that in the disc golf world, when we're unhappy with the way some tournaments are run, people go to social media?
I mean, it's one of many options, and it's the one where you get heard the loudest and nobody ends up looking good.
I think that Worlds is a good example of some social media posts that resulted in that exact phenomenon. So you think, go ahead, were you can say something?
Yeah. And really, I think that it's kind of a cultural issue more than it is like a management issue or something. Culturally, I think players need to be less resistant to like running things up the flagpole through the Pro Touring Players Committee, through the PDGA, or through, the Pro Tour panel. If we're able to do that, then, there's less opportunities for he said, she said, and, players have a lot of lobbying power. Like, they are instantly recognizable. They have a lot of pull with fans. And when their story gets out there first, that's who people are going to default to because they identify with those players. You don't necessarily identify with Mo or Johnny V or like Seth Finley. These guys work incredibly hard and do a great job, but they are having to make choices that are behind the scenes. Whereas you see Ulibarri on camera every time he does Jomez, and then you see him playing his round. If players are more willing to be more deliberate about their feedback, then it makes everyone's experience better. It makes us all look like we're rowing the boat in the same direction.
So the next subject I want to talk about, I want to read a small excerpt of a Twitter thread that you had. And this is actually, I mean, like I said, I was really excited to have you as my guest, but this was the one that was pretty right around when Charlie and I were looking for another guest and prompted me to want to talk to you about this subject. So I'm going to read just the first 3 tweets, and then I'm going to let you kind of explain where it goes from there. You say, it's been exciting to see high-profile disc golf player contracts and the attention they get from a variety of media, fan, and other player sources. At the risk of lobbying against myself and my peers, I want to think a little bit differently about the future these contracts portend. It's not wrong for manufacturers to pay players to endorse their products. It's also not wrong for players to capitalize on their value. This thread is more about the collective disc golf world reconsidering who and what provide value to the sport and recalibrating accordingly. Who or what has driven the long-term growth and recent boom in disc golf participation? That's a complex answer. We can't really itemize locally or worldwide. The current trend is to attribute it primarily to media exposure in the pro scene, but I think that's a little too simplistic. Where do you go from there, Andrew? I don't want to sit there and just read the tweet because I have the man himself in front of me, but describe where you go from this set of, assumptions and the foundation of the thought process that follows.
Oh, I wish you would read it because I worked hard on it. I'm also a better writer than I am speaker, I think. So where I go with that is to essentially say that we need to do a better job of taking care of volunteers. Because so many courses and tournaments and like staffing various tournaments are run by volunteer labor. And using myself as an example, Allie Stone and I have run the Women's Open of Maryland. This will be our 5th year doing it. We're going to be an A tier. The tournament runs in 3.5 months. Both of us are probably 60 hours into preparation already. And we've barely ordered anything. We just had registration open. running a tournament is a huge task, and it's like having 72 bosses, all of whom need your time and attention immediately. And like, I am genuinely responsible for their weekend going right. If I miss something now, it means that could be a big issue in a couple months if I haven't gotten the right permit or reserved the course, or, you know, if somebody has sponsored me and I forgot to order a banner. All these little micro things result in a tournament director's job being very, very challenging to get all the stakeholders on the same page and interested and like satisfied. Wherever you are, go find a tournament director and ask them, or a former tournament director, and ask them how hard it is. Uniformly, they're all going to say it is so hard and it is rewarding, and until I get fed up with it. TD burnout is huge. So is volunteer burnout. Nearly all the courses around me, the city mows, but you know, when a tree comes down, it's volunteers who are picking it up. When signage needs to be redone, or a basket needs to be reset, or any number of other things, it's volunteers who are doing that. And I'm pretty sure that that's the case most places. And while there are pay-to-play courses, while there are, you know, state parks where they might have a staff or a maintenance crew who do all those things, we have more or less built our structure of casual play and leagues and tournaments, and now the burgeoning pro tour and media scene. All of those things are built on a lot of like hard labor and volunteer labor that is done by a faithless army of people over the last 40 years, just about. So I think it's amazing that we're seeing 6 and 7 figure contracts signed, and we don't know anything about bonuses and stuff. But there's still a whole lot of people out there who aren't being recognized for their efforts nearly well enough. Their hourly wage is $0. And to me, that seems like a miss collectively by disc golf to recognize the people at the very top, but not think about all the labor that goes into what built that structure. It's kind of like if you go to a basketball game, you go in and there's a parking attendant. There's probably like some off-duty police who are hired to do traffic control and stuff. There's, someone taking your ticket. There's hot dog vendors. There's ushers. There's security staff on the court. There's a whole bunch of trainers. There's, hundreds to thousands of support staff who make one NBA game possible. But you don't care about that. Like, you're there to see Steph and Clay. Like, everybody else is just like an inconvenience and a sideshow. But if they weren't there, like, your experience would get incrementally worse with everyone that wasn't there. The same thing is kind of true in disc golf. If you go to Champions Cup this year, let's do a public course. If you go to D-Glow this year, you are obviously there to see the top players in the world play disc golf. But there's also spotters and parking attendants and the folks who set up the tent and the scaffolding. There's people doing crowd control. Like, there's this huge infrastructure, let alone the ones who leveled the tee pads, let alone the ones who did the limbing and the clearing to make sure that each green was clear and the spectators had sight lines. I know that there's a huge difference in scale there, but while we're still young, I think it's really important that we put together a structure of or a culture of valuing what the contributions are by everyone in the community.
So I want to talk a little bit more in detail about how we do that on terms of volunteers. And do you believe this is something that needs to be done, for example, at the club level, where certain amount of club fees, when I go play League right now, I pay $5 a week and some of that goes to the club. Do I need to be paying $7 a night for League? And then when that tree comes down, you pull some out of club funds to pay for people to come clear it? What is the implementation of that volunteer base and ensuring that they are compensated for their time?
Yeah, I think it's going to scale differently based on every club. The state of Delaware essentially has one overarching club that helps administer their tournaments and things like that. But in Maryland, it's more or less like course by course. So I don't know what it's exactly like where you are. Let's talk about tournaments real quick. The PDGA allows tournament directors to keep a certain percentage of fees. And those can be for greens fees, or for a C tier, they only have to pay out 85% of income, less any fees paid to the PDGA. I know that you and Charlie have spoken before about the experiential value of playing in a tournament. And it's kind of weird to me that certainly at the amateur level, but also at the pro level, that we are not ascribing a certain value to expectation of getting an equivalent value back in players pack or payout. But if a TD reveals that they're profiting, or that they're taking, $10 for greens fees to pay the private course owner, people get salty in a hurry. It's kind of disconcerting. And I told you that we're 3.5 months out and already 60 some hours in. I guarantee you that's going to be up in the 200-300s by the time I'm done with this tournament. And I'm expecting to make $0 off of that. So at the club level, I think what makes sense is, at the PDGA level, I think it makes sense that they reconsider in the tour standards what a TD is allowed to take, but implement some checks on that. You don't want a TD who's, counting everything as a pass through that goes to them, but they should be able to make a reasonable amount per event that they run. At the club level or the course level, I think you're right that it does make sense that, if $1 gets taken out of everyone's league and goes to the course fund, then that lets you do erosion control projects. It lets you have a little bit in the kitty if a basket gets hit by a tree. It lets you reimburse someone for their chainsaw gas so that, they can cut up something. There's a million little ways that you can do this, but I think expecting all of this work to get done by volunteers, but never thanking them, I think that's a big mistake. And it's a problem that we can only correct broadly and culturally.
I think we already see a little bit of the consequence of the underappreciation of this staff. Charlie and I talked about in the last show, for the 2023 Worlds, there was a single bid, and it was from Jeff Spring, who is the Pro Tour director, whose job is to run a tour. And so, they could not get another bid from volunteers, because to undertake Worlds is a massive endeavor. And like you said, can often be, and I think this goes at a lot of levels, can be a thankless position at times. Something that I believe could be a real possibility, because when you look at tournament directors, I think that especially as you get up into A tiers, and with the size the A tiers are becoming, and not to mention the Pro Tour, I could very personally foresee each state, for example, having a full-time allotted position that is like the state tournament director who oversees A tiers in that state and then coordinates with regional staff in order to help make that happen. And then that becomes a full-time paid position. That's kind of how I imagine the evolution of the sport. Do you see it in a similar way? Or do you think that it's going to continue with just TDs popping up as they want to run events, and there's the need and the demand in the community, and that we just need to find better ways to appreciate those and pay for those TDs as they do so?
I hadn't considered what you're proposing, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. There are guys like Chuck Connolly or Mike Barnett or Mike Solt who have all been able to run 20 some tournaments a year, often with, the backing of a disc vendor, who can help provide them enough product for amateur payouts, which allows them to hit their margins so that they are making a little bit. Running it more like a nonprofit where there's kind of an endowed position to run tournaments on behalf of a larger group, that would provide a lot of continuity and a lot of stability towards an area's ability to do that. I like it as a concept.
Great. Do you have anything else you want to add in this subject? I highly recommend, if you haven't done it yet, go look at the Twitter thread. I think it's written incredibly well. Andrew, I think you're an incredible speaker and writer, and I really appreciated it. Is there anything else you wanted to add on that subject then?
You can find that on Twitter at fish58320. That's fish and then my PDGA number. I'm also kind of toying with the idea of writing an article for Ultiworld that fleshes this out a little more thoroughly. It's hard to get a complete set of thoughts in 280 characters without missing some valuable context or being able to cite sources. So I'd like to flesh this out a little bit more and share that my vision here isn't that we decrease the pay that goes to pros. It's that we make the bottom of that pyramid have a little better financial support so that it's not just turning over. We're not running through TDs as they get sick and tired of it after a couple years. This is something that I think can make the sport more sustainable so that we don't end up in a situation where there are no youth soccer coaches, so we can't have a soccer program this year. We can't, nobody cleaned up fairway number 3, so we can't play fairway number 3, that sort of thing.
I think it's a unique problem that both the Pro Tour as well as the PDGA has to address at all levels of the sport. It's something that individual clubs, their presidencies, tournament directors, it is a complex problem, but I think it speaks really well to the importance of the appreciation of those who have put a lot into our game. And I honestly think that it makes the sport better. It advances the sport. It makes for better quality tournaments. It makes for better quality courses, and keeps us, enjoying what we love to play. That's going to do it for the Upshot today. Andrew, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you joining us for a guest host. You can find Andrew on Twitter, Instagram, and then you can also purchase an Upper Park disc golf bag using his code Andrew10 in order to sponsor and support him. Andrew, thanks so much, and we will see you tomorrow with our second episode of our interview series. Thanks for listening to The Upshot.